believe that it is already summertime? I mean, this year has flown by so quickly. If your child is not already out of school, I'm sure school is coming to a close quickly. And that can mean some really exciting things like road trips and baseball games, maybe some camping or just sleeping in late and lounging around in your pajamas. But if you're a parent who has a child with some speech delays, there can also be some fear and anxiety rising up, especially if you've been seeing some really great progress through speech therapy through the school year. You might be thinking, will my child continue to make these gains or will they slip way back to where they started? What's going to happen? So today I'm going to encourage you that there are some fun activities that you can do with your child over the summer so it doesn't feel like work, but you're still focusing on some speech and language goals and skills so that come school year starting up in the fall, they haven't regressed or fallen back to their old patterns. So if we have not met yet, my name is Jessica Bawag, and I am the owner and speech language pathologist at Fluent Children's Therapy here in Tacoma, Washington. And I'm excited to join you today. Each week, I like to just pop on here for a few minutes to chat about some questions that we get from parents or some helpful resources or tools that could help you and your child with their speech and language skills. So when it comes to summertime, I'm going to talk about 3 to 5-year-olds and then some 6 to 9-year-old activities. And it really comes down to having fun, especially with our little guys. We are looking at how can we use play to help their learning and their language skills. And then for the 6 to 9-year-olds, they're starting to do more academics, some reading and writing. So how can we incorporate that into your summertime plans? Again, to make it fun and continue to learn some skills or maintain the skills they've learned over the school year. So let's jump right in. I don't know if this resonates with you, but when I was a kid, summertime was so fun for me, especially the first week or two. I thought, wow, there's no school, we can do whatever we want. But then after a while, we started to get restless, my brothers and I, because there wasn't really much routine or schedule. We were kind of just, it was a free-for-all. We could basically do whatever we wanted within the parameters of our parents' guidelines, of course. But sometimes you may notice, especially for the younger kids, if they're in preschool or just starting school, that summertime can be hard for a lot of our kiddos because they no longer have that routine or structure that school provides for them. So summertime can be fun and free for sure, but if you're finding that your child is having some difficulty making that transition from the school year to the summertime because there's not as much structure, you might want to consider continuing to use some sort of schedule. It can be loose and it can vary from day to day, but a lot of times our kids appreciate that structure probably more than we give them credit for because they know what to expect. And depending on the age and skill level of your child, a visual schedule could be helpful. If they're reading, you can definitely do a written schedule, but it could be a fun time in the beginning of each day to just kind of come together, okay, or the beginning of each week. Okay, what are we going to do today? Or what are we going to do this week? Write it down. Okay, we're still needing to start with brushing your teeth, having breakfast, getting dressed, and then the fun can come after that. And then at night, even if they get to stay up later than they would during the school year, you could still brush your teeth, read a book, say your prayers, go to bed. Having that similar routine throughout the summer, even if the middle part is varied depending on what you guys have planned, can really help our kiddos a lot when it comes to tantrums and frustration and things like that. And that can also help them to stay more calm and more peaceful with their friends or their siblings or whatever the case may be. So I would encourage you to consider a schedule for your child, whatever age they are. And then when it comes to younger kids, play is really such a crucial thing for them to be doing during the summertime to help with their speech and language learning as well. So I'm going to just jot a few notes here. And I just wanted to pause a minute and take some time to look at the different types of play, because a lot of times we'll work with families and they say, oh yeah, my kid plays, but maybe they're just dumping toys out and putting them in buckets or opening and closing doors. And that is a very early stage of play, but then there are very different levels of play. And that is something that you, as mom and dad, can help with over the summertime or really any time of the year while you're interacting with them at home. So let me write that note for schedules throughout the summer. And then we've got the different types of play. So we've got the early stage of play is what we call parallel play. And that is very much like it sounds. That is when children are playing side by side next to each other. And even though it may not look like they're really sharing toys yet or interacting with the other child, they are influencing each other, even if it doesn't look like it. So one thing that you can do to reinforce this or practice this play skill or create opportunities for it is to have something that's like a shared item between two children. So if you're setting up play dates and your child is at the parallel play stage, you could maybe have a bin, like they're sharing the same pool of crayons. They're not yet interacting with each other, so they're not necessarily expected to share the crayons or to color the same thing, but they're sharing the same item in the middle, and they're just being in the same place at the same time. And that is an important thing for children to learn as they are growing up. So again, this comes fairly early, but depending on what stage of development your child is in, parallel play is often one of the early stages of play. So an example of this would be maybe share, or how about just say like a communal crayon bin. And it doesn't have to be crayons. It can be anything. So a pile of blocks in the middle, or Legos, or maybe some Play-Doh in the middle, and they're each grabbing some of it. If they are at the stage where they're starting to share, so parallel play is a beginning step where they're using the same toy on their own. But if they are at the level of sharing, you can start to, or if you'd like to push them to that next level, you can start to use some visuals to help them learn how to share and take turns, especially if you've got like, if you're signing them up for any classes where there's a group of kids, or maybe you and a bunch of friends are coming together and there's a bunch of the kids together and there's maybe only one toy, or one toy that everybody wants, which always seems to happen. You can create a visual that will help your children remind them of whose turn it is in a very concrete way. So you can just draw a big circle. So I'll put like a sharing circle, I'll call it. This is no technical term, sharing circle. But you could just make a brightly colored circle that has, it just says my turn. Even if they're not reading, it doesn't matter. They can just use that circle so that they can say, oh, okay, it's Johnny's turn with the toy now. Okay, now we're going to turn it, give it to Dominic. It's Dominic's turn. And if, depending on, again, what level your child is at, maybe even using a timer or something concrete. This is especially useful if you've got a really highly preferred toy. So if it's like a tablet or anything like that, but also like really cool light up toys or cars or anything that's high interest for kids, they might need something a little bit more structured. Just telling them, okay, share with your friend, share with your brother. They might not understand what that concept means. So giving them some concrete ways to understand that can really go a long way to decrease their frustration. Not all the time, there might still be some tears, but at least you're helping them to learn some of these early social skills that they'll need as they grow up at a very young age. So that could be an activity that you do with your kiddos over the summer. The other one you can do, depending, again, say your children really love drawing and they're maybe a little older, maybe 4 or 5, you could even share and take turns with drawing and copying different things, or starting to draw together like a shared picture. So maybe somebody draws part of a dinosaur and then the other kid draws the spikes on the back, and then the other kid starts to draw some feet, and then the other kid draws some tails. So those kinds of taking turn activities are really key for your child. You may be thinking, what does this have to do with speech and language? Well, It's a really foundational skill when it comes to having conversations, because when we have conversations, we go back and forth from one person to the next. We have to learn how to wait our turn, even though we might want to really get excited and share something. We have to learn to listen to the other person, and we have to learn to take our own turn, because sometimes it gets too one-sided where only one person is talking. So learning these sharing skills early on through play is really going to be important for your children's success when it comes to having conversations as they get older. So that is parallel play, kind of just a very general gist of it. This usually comes around ages 2.5 to 3.5 years old. So 2.5 to 3.5. But again, depending on the level of development for your child, they could be a little older and still working on those skills, and that's totally okay. The next level of play that I wanted to talk about is associative play. Just write that down. Associative play. And what that means is when the children actually really start to interact. They're more interested in playing with each other rather than playing alone. They're starting to talk to each other, ask questions, actually starting to share the materials. And you can start thinking about associative play, for instance, when you're building a tower or making something out of Legos. You could have a group of kids with a ton of Legos available, and they're all working together to build a city. They've got to share the materials in the middle. It's a little bit different than parallel play. Parallel play was still using the same materials, but making their own thing. Associative play is now using the same materials to make a shared experience, a shared thing. So think about this as on their own, and associative play is interacting together. So that could be building a Lego city together. And I remember when my brothers were really young, I mean, not that young, they still enjoy building Legos, but they had to use a lot of communication skills when it came to this associative play and building something together with other kids. They had to use negotiation. If two people wanted to build a tower in the same location, that wouldn't have worked out. So how could they negotiate? Okay, you can build it there, but I'll build it on this side. Or maybe there was only enough materials to make one firehouse, but both of them wanted to work on it. So how could they negotiate, talk to each other, take turns? Again, all of these social skills are really important. And you may think, again, what does this have to do with speech and language? But that is how we interact with other people, even as adults. We've got to learn to negotiate. We've got to learn to compromise. We've got to learn to work together towards a common project or a common goal. So that is an example of associative play. The next one I want to talk about is cooperative play. And again, before I was a speech language pathologist, I had no idea there were so many different kinds of play. And it's really interesting to learn about it and to share that with the parents that we work with, because it really opens their eyes to all of the little sophistications or the levels of play. Hopping back to associative play real quick, this usually comes around 3 to 4.5 years of age. But again, children of every age could definitely work on some level or some form of this when it comes to negotiating, compromise, asking each other questions, talking with each other, being curious about what the other kid is doing. That all comes with associative play. And now jumping to cooperative play, this comes around 4 to 5.5 years of age. And that is when children are truly engaging in social interaction. So they are learning to take turns and work together. It's really an extension of associative play and just learning even more sophistication of those skills. There's a lot of verbal communication because that's the only way that they're going to be able to work it out. Some of these, you really start to see children's personalities come out when we're talking about cooperative play. These are more people games, but at a different level. So not just tag or hide and seek, where they're just kind of doing a cause and effect relationship, but really where they've got roles and plot lines and they're interchangeable. So think about like more pretend play in terms of maybe they're playing things like cops and robbers, or princesses and dragons, or something where each person has a character and they're acting in that character and they're communicating with the other children in a way that requires imagination and communication and shared ideas. Maybe they're both, several of them are going to go save the princess in the castle or something along those lines, or maybe they're all going on a treasure hunt and they've got to go over the log and through the river and around the mountains, and they've got to all work together and communicate to get to that goal. So that is what we are seeing when it comes to cooperative play. You could also do some competitive activities such as water balloon fights over the summer, which is a ton of fun, especially when it gets really warm. Sports games includes real cooperative play skills. So we've got sports, we've got water balloon fights, we've got pretend scenarios or stories where each person is their own character. All of those skills are really crucial when it comes to your children developing their language skills, because that imagination is what makes them have interesting stories to tell. They've got to recall their own past experiences to create new experiences. They've got to use language to talk about the past and the present and the future. So all of these communication and language skills are embedded in all of these types of play. So really, when you're taking the time this summer to work and play with your child, it really is work for them, and they are really learning, even though it's not sitting down at a table doing flashcards or doing homework assignments. So just really, hopefully this was important information for you to learn about how play is really useful and beneficial and important for your child's learning. Now moving on to 6 to 9 year olds. They're getting a little bit more sophisticated, so a little bit more independent as well. They may not always want to play with you all the time, and that's okay. That's part of development. But there are some important academic things that we can start to incorporate with their fun and play and learning as well. Now that they're starting to read more and write more, we can start to incorporate that in a fun way. Again, it doesn't have to be sitting down at a table doing work in that way, but you can still get some learning in. So one way to use over the summer is to use food. Food is often very motivating for a lot of kids, especially if you're going to the beach for a day trip, or maybe having a picnic at the park, or a 4th of July barbecue. You can use play games and test following directions when it comes to food. A great example is to have your child help you make a simple recipe. They've got to learn how to read the recipe. Even if it's just a family recipe, you can write it down. They've got to read the numbers and the measurements. They've got to learn how to follow the directions, whether it's from you telling it to them verbally or them reading it from a recipe card. So we can do some cooking activities at this age, and they've got to be working on, again, following directions, reading the words from the recipe if that's the level where your child is. If they're not reading yet, you can always use some pictures. So I'll put reading or pictures, as that can really help your child to understand what is needing to go into the recipe itself. You could then talk about the foods that you're making. So again, talking about it in future tense. Okay, we're going to make. Again, you can start using those grammar parts in the sentences. So using grammar, different verb tenses to talk about what you're going to do. We're going to make pancakes. We're going to need eggs. We will need to put it all in a bowl. And then afterwards, you can talk about what you had. Oh, I loved putting the syrup on the pancakes. I loved mixing it up. I didn't like it when it all spilled on the table. So talking about it in future tense and past tense, again, can help your child with those grammar skills and the language development. Another thing you can do is talk about your travel experiences. Whether you're at the beach, maybe you have a scavenger hunt for your kiddos, and they've got to use some language skills in that way. So, scavenger hunt. Either they're going to be reading the instructions, you could be describing a place, and even if it's in your house or your backyard, you could say something like, go find the surprise at the place where leaves grow on top of a trunk. And so they've got to read that or listen to you telling them that, think about it in their mind, and then find the place. You're not saying go to the tree and find the surprise. You're describing the object. So they've got to really, one, remember the language that you're using and think about what are the features of the tree, or what are the features describing that I can go find this thing. So again, a scavenger hunt is a great way to incorporate those language skills, those what we call higher level, more complex, or more abstract thinking skills. Don't give them the exact answer, but describe around it. So describing features. Again, they have to keep in their mind the language that you've given them, so that either if it's not reading, we'll work on some language memory. And if they're doing it with siblings or friends, they've got to also work on this cooperative and associative play. So working together with other people, probably more cooperative play, working together with other people to get to a common goal. So that is a lot of fun, whether it's, again, in your backyard, or maybe you go camping and that's an activity that you do. Again, all things that you can use to describe. If you're at the beach, you could say, what comes from the sea and has 5 fingers or 5 points? And they may be thinking, oh, it's a starfish. So again, lots of fun things that you could do with that. If you guys are planning a road trip this summer, you could work on some, what do we call them? Alphabet or phonetics, excuse me, phonological skills when it comes to road trips. You could do things like rhyming games. These all help with your child's reading skills. So rhyming games, you could do I see, or like I spy games with the letters A through Z. So, okay, what I spy something that starts with a b sound. And I would say to try to use the sound of the letter instead of the name of the letter, because that will help your child with the reading skills when they have to identify, okay, what's a word that starts with D, instead of saying what's a word that starts with D. So that could be helpful for them. So A to Z, they've got to think about A to Z, I spy. They've got to think about the sound. They've got to make that association, and then they've got to look to see what object starts with that letter. So those are a lot of fun, and then you can always expand upon it by having them use it in a sentence, or find a word that rhymes with it, or maybe you get even more fancy and say, okay, I spy something that ends with the D sound, and maybe they find a red road or they say road. So you're working on beginning and ending sounds of words. Beginning, ending sounds. And again, something that's fun and playful, doesn't feel like work, but it's definitely working on them learning parts, again, what we call phonological skills, phonological awareness, which is crucial for them being able to read more fluently. On road trips, you can also have your child write in a journal or write short stories, whether it's on the trip or when you come back. Write in a journal. And those are always fun to look back onto as your child gets older, and reminding them, hey, look how far you've come, especially if writing is not their most fun thing to do, if it's not their favorite thing to do. Looking back and reminding them of how far they've come and how much progress they've made can really be empowering for your child. So say, wow, when we went on this trip 3 years ago, you were only able to write a few words, and look at it now, you're able to write 4 or 5 complete sentences. Isn't that awesome? Look how much you've learned and grown over time. That can be so empowering for your child. One, to hear that you're very proud of them, and two, to see their own work. It's not somebody else giving them that acknowledgement as much as them knowing that they did it for themselves. So writing in a journal or short stories, and always looking back over time can be a great tool and strategy. Again, you can use any time of the year, but road trips are a lot of fun for that, or going to visit family or whatnot. And then there's just, the last thing I would say is that there's just no substitute for sitting down and reading with your child. Whatever level or stage your child is at when it comes to reading, maybe they're just at the listening stage. Maybe they're, still 3 or 4, and you're just sitting around the bed reading, or maybe sitting around the campfire reading a story, and you're asking them questions and you're talking about it. Maybe encouraging your child to explain their favorite part of the story, all of that. And then independent reading when it comes to, road trips, if they can read while they're driving. I know a lot of people can't read in cars, but even if they're at the campsite or at grandma's house, bringing a book along with them. And it's also helpful to see the whole family engaging in some sort of reading, whether it's a magazine or a newspaper or an actual book. When your children see you reading as well, and you setting aside time for that reading experience, that it motivates them to also engage with the family in that way. And then you can all have a conversation afterwards about what you were reading about or what you're excited to learn about next in the story. And just having that shared experience can really go a long way for moving from reading just for academic purposes or school purposes to really reading for fun and becoming a lifelong reader. So hopefully, I know that was a lot of information, but wherever your child is at, I hope you have a really fun summer and utilize some of these strategies or tips. I'll just put reading down here at the very bottom. And I will see you guys real soon for some additional tips for a little older kids. Next time we'll be talking about 10 years and up, and really learning about some social skills when it comes to communicating in a group, when it comes to being a teenager, and how to really read those nuances when it comes to sarcasm and jokes. So I hope you will join me next time as we have another conversation about communication. Take care.